Hello and welcome back to a demo video dealing with dividend distributions, right? In the lecture video, we talked at length about how to calculate dividends, how to calculate dividends in arrears, how to determine how much dividends how much of the dividend payment should be distributed to the common shareholders. So what I want to do right now is just kind of walk through an example here. This is not your book, something I just kind of created. So let's look at an example here. So Lakeside Resort has the following shares outstanding. They have 20,000 shares of $50 par value, 6% cumulative preferred stock. They also have 80,000 shares of $10 par value common stock. They tell us that the board of directors declares a cash dividend amounting to $160,000. Great. What we need to do is basically what we need to do is determine the total dividends that need to be distributed, as well as determine the per share value, or the per share dividend for each share. Okay. Now, part A says if there is no dividend in arrears on preferred stock, okay, meaning there's no dividend in arrears, we're up to date, we need to calculate how much in total dividends and dividends per share is paid to each share of stock. Super easy. Super duper easy to do, okay? First thing I need to do is we need to figure out how much should we distribute to the preferred shareholders. We don't need to worry about dividends in arrears. We just need to allocate this current year dividend of $160,000. We need to allocate it to the preferred shares, and then we need to allocate it to the common shares. So easy to do, okay? How do we calculate that total amount? I hope you have it in your notes, because I told you to put it in your notes. And it was in our lecture video. We walked through it a number of times, right? So I need to take first the number of shares times the times the par value per share. Times the par value per share times number of shares that we have outstanding. Number of shares outstanding times the par value times the, I'm going to say the stated rate. That's that rate that they tell us, okay? So we're going to calculate preferred shares first. Of course we're going to calculate preferred shares first. Why? Because we have a total dollar dividend, $160,000. We need to figure out, first of all, how much goes to preferred and then how much goes to common, right? So to figure this out, we're going to figure out, and we're going to work on A first, no dividends in arrears, okay? We need to figure out what is the total dividend to the preferred shareholders. Well, that's easy for us to do. We know that we have 20,000 shares outstanding. We're going to multiply that by the $50 par value per share times the stated rate, which in this example they tell us it is 6%. So how do we calculate the preferred share? Well, I'm just going to run the numbers, right? 20,000 shares times $50 per share times 0.06, 6%. I get $60,000, okay? So that's easy, right? Now I need to figure out what's the balance to the common shareholders. Well, that's easy, right? I know that the total cash dividend is $160,000. I need to subtract 160,000. That's the total cash dividend minus how much are we distributing to the preferred, because preferred shareholders get their dividends first. Minus 60,000. I get $100,000. Okay? Super easy for us to do, right? Now I need to calculate the per share value. Well, that's easy. To figure out the per share value, I take the total amount of the dividend. So total amount of dividend, and I divide that by the number of shares outstanding. Okay, so let's look at let's look at preferred first. Okay, super easy for us to do. How much is the dividend for the preferred shareholders? I already figured that out. I don't need to calculate anything. It's on the screen. $60,000. So I'm going to take $60,000 and I'm going to divide that by the number of preferred shares I have outstanding. How many preferred shares do I have outstanding? 20,000. So to figure out the dividend per share, I just take the total amount of the dividend, $60,000, and divide it by 20,000 shares. I end up with $3 per share. I need to do the same thing for these common people, or the common shareholders. Well, that's easy. What's the total amount of, let me rephrase that. Yeah, what's the total amount of dividend that is that's going to the common shareholders? Well, you don't need to calculate anything. Why? Because we already calculated it. It's on the screen. It's the $100,000. That is their total dividend. Okay? I need to divide now by the number of shares I have outstanding of that common shares. Well, the problem tells us that we have 80,000 shares. So I'm going to divide by 80,000. And the dividend per share, I take my $100,000 and I divide it by the number of shares outstanding, 80,000. I end up with $1.25 per share. Okay, that's part A. Now, part B, super simple. Part B says if 1 year dividend in the rears exists on the preferred stock, how much in total dividends and in dividends per share is paid to each class of stock? Super easy. First thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate preferred, always preferred first. Super easy for us to do. How do I calculate the total dividend that we need to pay to the preferred shareholders? Well, I do the same thing, right? I need to figure out what's the number of shares that are outstanding. I need to multiply that by the par value. And I need to multiply that by the stated rate. Okay. Now, we have a little caveat here, right? A little additional information, right? We have a little hiccup in the problem. That hiccup is we have dividends in arrears, right? We're 1 year behind. So that means that we need to pay them, and when I say them, I mean the preferred shareholders. We need to pay the preferred shareholders last year's dividend that we didn't pay that we should have, and this year's dividend. So we need to multiply this by 2. Okay? Super simple. So to figure out, excuse me. So to figure out the preferred shareholders, we're going to take the number of shares outstanding. For the preferred shares, it's 20,000 shares times you guessed it, $50 par value times the stated rate of 6% times 2, because we have 2 years of dividends we gotta pay these people. So go ahead and run the numbers. 20,000, number of shares times par value, $50 per share, times stated rate, 6%, times number of years, 2. We owe the preferred shareholders $120,000. Now the balance goes to the common. How do I figure that out? Well, that's easy. I know the total cash dividend is $160,000 that I'm paying this year. I need to subtract out how much of that total I have to pay to the preferred shareholders, $120,000. I end up with 40 grand. $40,000 is what is going to be distributed as a cash dividend to the common shareholders. Now, I need to figure out what is the per share dividend, right? I need to calculate that. Super simple, right? I need to take the total dividend that class received and divide it by the number of shares outstanding. Well, that's easy, all right? What's the total dividend that we're going to pay now to preferred shareholders? We already calculated it. It's on the screen. I hope you identified the $120,000. I need to divide that by the number of shares outstanding. Well, we're talking about preferred shares. I have 20,000 shares outstanding. That means my dividend per share for preferred shareholders is the dividend of $120,000 divided by the number of shares outstanding, 20,000. These guys now get $6 per share. I need to do the same thing for the common shareholders, right? What is the dividend per share for the common shareholders? Well, that's easy. How much am I paying them in dividends? Well, I'm paying them $40,000, right? 40,000. How'd I get that 40 grand? $160,000 was the total dividend payable. 20,000 of that 160 went to the preferred shareholders. What's left? 40,000. That's what we will distribute to the common shareholders. So to figure out the per share, I take that $40,000 of dividends that they are entitled to. I divide it by the number of shares outstanding. In this case, I have 80,000 shares. I run the numbers. I end up with 50 cents per share. Okay? So that, my friends, is the calculation, or how you calculate or how you allocate total dividend to each share class based on, is that preferred share, is it cumulative, and does it have any dividend in arrears? If it does have dividend in arrears and it is cumulative preferred stock, we need to first pay anything in the arrears, then pay the current. Once the preferred shareholders are taken care of, guess what? The rest goes to the common. Okay? So that's an example. If you have any questions, write them down. We'll talk next Tuesday or Tuesday. Ask me those questions. Not a problem. Be happy to explain it. Chances are, if something is as clear as mud to you, it's probably going to be as clear as mud to somebody else in the class. Okay? That's okay. We'll get everything cleared up through our Collaborate sessions. Okay? So thanks for tuning in. Now, when we come back in our next video, we're going to go back to lecturing, and we're going to talk about stock dividends. So we're going to see, how do we calculate stock dividends? We're going to see how do we calculate stock splits. So tune back in for that one. Should be fun.